Hello, folks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really happy to be able to be together, Henry and I, in sharing this powerful theme on powerful conversations. Just to say that because there's the two of us in having this conversation together, that's sort of the model that we would like to use. This is very much a conversation between Henry and myself, sharing something of our own experience and thoughts and ideas about how to have powerful conversations. And so we're just going to have our conversation, and hopefully that will lead to some thoughtful consideration and insights for all of us.
Absolutely. So we will trip over each other's words, and I hope that then you will also feel as though this is a very natural piece. We're not teaching at you. Instead, we are leading by example.
Absolutely. Okay. And we're even going to stop and try to do a role play at, right in the middle of it, which is our way of practicing the very thing we're speaking about.
Okay. We'll dive right in.
Okay.
Intention.
Intention. So thanks, Kevin. So our intention today is to really explore how to bring a mentoring coaching lens to leadership practice. It's really how do we receive, listen, engage dialogue with our colleagues so that we shape the culture that we want to lead within. And I've often thought about mentorship, always think about mentorship through the lens of building that learning culture together. So how do we build the trust, confidence, belief that growth, collective growth, is an enterprise that we undertake with everyone? And so it's that shift from thinking about leadership as a heroic undertaking of a single individual to being one of how do we lead for the culture that we really want to have in our schools.
Understanding, of course, that culture is made up of individuals, and though that gets messy, and leading in a community of different-minded people, we all know can oftentimes bring a whole whirlwind of different ideas, thoughts. So we thought we'd start off by showing you possibly something that you could relate to, possibly a microcosm of your own school. And they were titling this as, is this your reality? So. Hopefully that's not your staff meeting. On the other hand, some of those characters in there, you may be able to identify and put your own names to. Often we do feel as leaders ineffective. A whirlwind of contributors, different people almost talking at each other, not listening to each other. So how do we lead? And so today we're going to throw 3 stages of it and propose to you some things that we can take away to really help you develop that communication skill set. There you go.
So we'd like to look at it through 3 key themes. And really, these really follow the nature of a conversation itself. So how do we enter the conversation? Thinking about our mindset. What is the interplay between the ways of being and the ways of doing that are always interconnected? And how do we listen in a conversation for the deeper levels of what's being communicated? Then we want to explore a little bit about the skill set. So the quality of language that we use in conversation together, the quality of questions that we use to deepen the conversation, to look at the various possibilities. And thirdly, we're going to look at what we call all set, which is how the skills of moving the conversation forward into desired action, which is ultimately what the intention and purpose of our conversations are in a professional environment like we all work in. So mindset, skill set, all set.
Let's start with mindset. So we thought we would always try to have some sort of imagery that would help us really remind ourselves of what each of these components were. So mindset, we found ourselves gravitating towards this image of an iceberg. And if we take a look at it in its visual sense in nature, and then as a theoretical sense by our next image, then we can see then that what we're really talking about. Much of what we experience and react to is above the surface. These are the behaviors of the people that we are interacting with, that we are having conversations with. And what we often do not see and what we do not experience, and sometimes that we do not take into our own interactions, is what is below the surface. And those are, it's huge at times. And that could be really influencing the behaviors that we do see.
And in the fullness of what goes on in schools, the doing is the white above the sea. It's all the doing that we are engaged with all day. And it's always being influenced and driven and shaped by those beliefs, needs that we're bringing to the efforts that we're making.
Yeah, I think that for me to really look at this on a day-to-day basis, the question is that our days are filled with just looking and observing.
Mm-hmm.
And in our interactions, how much of that is then we just jump to certain things without considering what is beneath. And then how do we actually reveal those things that are beneath?
Mm-hmm.
Is, I think, for me, that intentional piece. The intentional piece of saying, what do I need to say? What do I need to look for? What do I need to listen for to be able to see how that person is feeling, to hear how that person is feeling, or to know what is behind their needs, what their needs are.
And I think this often takes a kind of slowing down, which is difficult because the pace of life in a school is often is moving so quickly. But if we can slow it down a little bit, then it gives us the opportunity to listen in a little more deeply. And it's that listening in a more committed way for the tone, the emotion, the facial and body expressions that are being expressed as we're engaging in conversation. It's also listening for what might be wanted in this conversation. What's being asked for? Does our colleague want to just be heard? Are they asking for information? Are they looking for some validation or a sense of significance of an effort that they've made? So we talk a lot about that active deep listening, but it really is something we need to practice and be attending to the various cues and various efforts of what someone is asking of us and bringing to a conversation.
Yeah, Alison asked me to think of a personal anecdote, something that would give a good example of where did I keep in mind this? And so a possible story that many of you would have had is report card season, and you've been up for many, many hours reading report cards. You're checking off, I've read division 17, 18, and you find out that you're missing a division. The next day, you're in the office, and that particular teacher comes in, doesn't really make eye contact, and you shout out, hey, I still haven't seen your report cards yet. And there's still no eye contact, and then the person says, I'll get them to you as soon as I can. And the conversation stops there. The conversation really, then I ask myself, what did I not do? What have I not kept in mind when I engaged that person? Have I really, the behavior is obvious. Things were not done. There was no intention to engage with me. There was no intention to actually even acknowledge the fact that they were coming in late. So that's just the behavior. But the question then that I have to ask myself is that what is actually influencing their behavior? How do I get to that so that I can see what that person is feeling, where there is an interplay between their values, their experiences, what's going on in their life, so that when I do ask that question, I can actually engage them more so that conversation becomes one that is inclusive, that becomes empowering, rather than something that may actually stop further conversations or actually limit our increased relationship. Yeah.
We wanted to give some thought and share our thinking about what gets in the way of powerful conversations as we look at each of these themes, because I think these are things that all of us do every day. And if we can be perhaps a little more conscious of it, then we can help ourselves with them. First one being judgment. So if we enter a conversation focusing on what someone has, what was done, and then trying to assess who is responsible for it. So when we go into a conversation, particularly as a leader, feeling that it's our role to be the arbitrator of justice, who is right, who is wrong, it can often really inhibit that place of really both deepening awareness and exploring possibilities. Another thing that we often do is autobiographical listening. This is where the situation that's being described to us in a conversation leads us to our own association with a similar experience. And we might respond saying, oh, yeah, that happened to me too. And then immediately the attention shifts to us telling our story about that particular situation. Obviously thinking it's going to be really helpful. It's going to provide, another opportunity of how to see into that. But often we ignore how that shifts the attention onto ourselves. Getting caught up with irrelevant details, getting bogged down in minutia of the way a story is being told and related, where we get distracted and distracted from the heart of the issue. And one that comes up for all of us is solution listening. That's the feeling compelled to provide an answer or a solution before the end of the conversation. And this comes from the eagerness to be helpful, to provide some immediate advice, and often driven by the desire to be seen and trusted as somebody who can solve problems. Often that's how we see the role of being an administrator. But often it can keep us from that place of really listening in deeply to what's being asked for, or just other possibilities of and collaborating on where something might go. Mm-hmm. So those are, yeah.
Fantastic. And we actually found a video by Brené Brown that described mindset in a different term. And so we hope that you are able to see some of the things that we brought up in this video, even though it's described as a different term. So we talked about mindset. We're going to move on to skill set now. And really, it's looking at the kind of questions that foster reflection and build trust. What kind of questions do we ask? And far be it for us to give you a script of actually a whole list of questions, we decided to categorize that into two types of questions that you can really sort of say, am I asking these types of questions when I'm engaging with somebody? So the first type of question that we really thought of was curious questions. Curious questions. Are you curious? Are you curious to find out a little bit more? Are your questions that you're asking open-ended that allows a person to provide more? And are they being asked in such a way that that person can feel as though you are not trying to come up with a solution right away? The second category is exploratory questions. And so there's your one there. And that is, are you asking questions that are looking for more details? Are you asking questions that are trying to dig a little bit deeper into what may be underlying?
And what the various possibilities may be, sort of taking some other perspectives on the particular situation as well. Yeah.
So it's really quick. It's really just two large general categories: curious questions and exploratory questions. So we thought that we're not here to teach at you, and we know that in your experiences, you have opportunities to ask these questions. But can you think of them so they fit into these two categories? So you can So you have a chance now, and this will become an interactive webinar. Here's your scenario. Let's try this out. Parent has come to ask that their child be removed from a teacher's class into another class. If you want to think of a different scenario that might be a little bit closer to home, feel free to, but here it is. Think of one question that could be under the category of curious. And actually, Kevin, it's right on the next little bullet, so it's okay. Yeah, I think it's right there. And then, so we'll give you a few chances. 1 minute, really quickly. What could be a curious question to ask this parent? If you're in the role of the principal, this parent has come to you. We'll just wait about a minute and we'll see if some of your questions come forward. What could be curious questions asked? And the next one would be, what would be an exploratory? What would be an exploratory one? Wonderful. We'll give you just a few seconds. And then just to show a little bit of risk-taking, Alice and I will try to do a little bit of a role play where we may take some of your questions and really show how a curious question and exploratory questions could really move the conversation to a place where it may not have necessarily gone to had we not used some of those questions. So give it about, do you want to start or, oh, look at that.
Oh, look, there we are. We'll just play with this for a couple of minutes together, Henry and I, and we certainly won't take it to the place where we actually move to a desired result or take it to any kind of a resolution. It's really just to have that practice ourselves with how might this play out if we're thinking, giving a little more thought to how to open up the conversation. So,
hi, Ms. Davies.
Hello, Mr. Au. I've come to see you today because, bottom line, I would like my child, Megan, moved out of the classroom she's in, and I'd like her moved into another class. Yeah, that's really what I want. And I've thought about it, and that's where I sit right now.
I'm curious why you want her to be moved.
Oh, well, it's just been going on such a long time now. She comes home from school, she's bored. I ask her what's gone on at school. All she talks about is all the other kids that are acting out, how noisy the classroom is. And I just feel like she's not learning. And I don't want her to be going to school every day and feeling that she's frustrated and she's in an environment where she really can't learn.
How long has she expressed that she's been frustrated?
Oh, it's been going on for a couple of months now, I think. It really has. And, you know, she's, you know, bottom line, I think that this is a teacher who just doesn't have the skill set to deal with the complexity of that classroom. And there's a lot of behaviors in there that are really making it tough for my kid. And I'm looking out for her. I just don't want her there anymore.
Well, what would be some skill sets that would really support Megan?
Well, I think being able to create a room where there's more calm. I haven't been in there myself. I haven't gone into the classroom. So I haven't really felt welcomed to do that. But I don't, you know, I can't really say what I think the teacher should be doing. I just feel like she should know basically how to handle the behavior of those kids. They just seem to be running wild in there from what my daughter describes.
Has your daughter described any other times that she's felt frustrated outside of school?
Well, she has her times of frustration, you know, like all kids do. But I do think it's something going on in that particular classroom. I really do. And I just don't think that's the only option for her.
Then how do you think Megan will react to this change that you're requesting?
Oh, well, I think that's a fair question. I hadn't really talked to her about it, actually. I just have been feeling increasingly frustrated myself, and so wanted to come in and see if this was a possibility that she be moved out. She does have friends in there. She does have friends, and that would probably be something that she would have trouble with. is leaving her friends.
So could we possibly explore some options that we might look at to help support Megan in the classroom?
Well, I guess we could, if you think that it's going to make a difference.
All right. Okay, so again, practice, and our goal is to demonstrate that it's not a prescribed script in any sense. Alison actually went off script many times through that in terms of our practice. It's gone all over the place. So on the other hand, the demonstration of being curious and the demonstration of exploring, I hope really was seen. And if not, feel free to give us some feedback so that we can actually learn as well too from your feedback. So we love as the more that we think about our questions in those categories, the more that we can actually build that into our toolbox. All right, so as there were things that got in the way of mindset, there are some things that also get in the way of our skill set.
Number one, which we hear all the time, is the pressure of time. There's just so little time in the day to create this more dynamic space where we can create room for that building of the empathy, the time it takes to really ask those curious questions and follow the path of exploring different possibilities. So time, absolutely. Leading with our assumptions. Particularly in a school environment, we all have opinions, thoughts about the parents and about specific children, and trying not to fall into those assumptions as and agreeing or disagreeing with the presumption that might be brought forward in a conversation as well. Again, the pressure to solve the problem and to satisfy our colleague in their, to ease the problem, to make it a little bit more comfortable. So feeling compelled to meet that ask as it comes to you. Trying to resist that a little bit, step back, and to create a little more room for the exploring to happen. And then for many of us, the discomfort with conflict. Seeing ourselves as mediators, wanting to soothe and solve the issue, wanting to avoid the dissonance that something of what might be raised in our school environments. Because we're always working in those environments of uncertainty in different situations. So wanting not to add to that conflict, wanting to reduce that conflict often can lead us to try to solve the problem really quickly and really easily. Mm-hmm. So moving into our third theme, which is moving the conversation forward. So together we've looked at coming together through a more empathic place with one another, this idea of co-creating with our partner different possibilities, and now how can we take that and move forward towards desired results?
Yeah, so we call this section all set. And what it really is we have talked about what the building of that culture is, that community piece. Ultimately, we're also leaders of that community. And so how do we move those people forward, and how do we synthesize that team together and what their needs are so that we can align it? One of the visions that, or the images that we typically have to help us really articulate the difference between our visions and our goals is this concept of, and if I get Kevin just to advance this slide, the difference between having a North Star and a North Pole. And this is obviously not our own ideas, but really it's more of a imagery and a metaphor of when we are trying to articulate where we are headed. Are we only talking about North Stars, these big, grandiose ideas that we really never actually ever reach? They are worthwhile, they're valuable, they ground us, they help us frame our language, but we can never really put our finger down in the sense that we've actually reached there. And then there are North Poles. The North Poles are the things that we can actually say, this is where we are headed, and we have made it here, but we still have a North Star to head towards. And these are things that oftentimes, if you think in the context of schools, we may have a lot of North Poles. We may have a lot of things, and Alice and I were chatting about some examples of these North Poles, things that we might end up actually just doing, but we forget why we're doing it. We may actually get to the point where an entire school is doing it. And one of the examples is even something like, for example, mindfulness. Mindfulness as it is could be a North Pole where we say we would like everybody in our school to be able to exercise mindfulness. And so you start off the day with mindful breathing, and you start that. But if you forget about the North Star, then you may never actually use that apart from just that start of the day. On the other hand, if you don't have North Poles, then what you end up doing is you just circle around, and people lose the direction. They don't actually know why they're doing the things that they're doing. So we really wanted to be able to articulate that. And to really move towards then, once we have articulated that, then what gets in the way of us making sure that this action is seen and evidenced in our schools?
Mm-hmm. So what can get in the way is overpromising, committing to action that it's still in the formation stage. We're still exploring the different possibilities, and committing to things out of a sense of obligation rather than a true consensus or a true agreement amongst all those that are part and are going to be influenced and part of that goal that you've set. Having vision without specific goals, I think Henry just addressed that with the metaphor of the North Star and the North Pole, that we need both. We need vision, and then we need specific ways of attaining specific goals that move us closer towards that vision. Resistance to change. Within every group, within every environment, there often is that force which challenges the change that's being asked for. And often it's a very useful force. It's often a very useful energy because it raises the questions that need to be raised. So if we can anticipate that resistance, often we can meet it in a much more open way. And then there's fatigue. There's just all that needs to be done, and misjudging how much we're capable of at any particular time, and really bringing ourselves into the picture and what we're able to do, what we're able to accomplish together.
Mm-hmm. I think that if we just go back to that slide just really quickly, Kevin, this would be that piece that these things that get in the way really are our need to be courageous. We need to be courageous to actually address these and to be able to say, what will we do? How will we work together to be able to take care of ourselves, to be able to use that resistance and then take that energy and move it forward, and what that looks like.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect about the all set, about moving things forward, is often that's the place where, as Henry was saying, we step forward with more of a courageous effort. And often that's where we can ask provocative questions that try to align individual effort with collective effort, that try to connect what we might be doing singly as individuals with that larger purpose. So sometimes once we're in the process together and we're in those sort of deeper conversations, often asking those, moving things forward with the more challenging, provocative questions can really help to create that greater sense of alignment with the effort that we're undertaking.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, we covered a lot.
So just as a way of summarizing where we've been in this webinar, this is a framework that we use in the mentorship program with the Principals and Vice Principals Association. And we found this to be extremely helpful just as a way of carrying this framework into the various contexts in which we work, whether we're mentoring, coaching, or just having a conversation with a between a principal, vice principal, whatever your context might be. So as a colleague comes, usually they have an agenda, and that sets the direction of a conversation. And the first thing we do is we try to expand awareness. Can we just, yeah, thanks, Kevin. The next one. Yeah, so that's how we enter into the conversation. That's the mindset. And then we explore and extend possibilities. What are some of the other perspectives, the other ways we might look at this? What are some of the various ways we can think about moving forward? And then the third aspect, realizing desired action. So expanding awareness, extending possibilities, realizing desired action. Just a simple framework and a way of thinking about how we move through a conversation with our colleagues so they can be more powerful and we can really support the capacity of each other's professional growth.
Well, we've covered a lot in the time, and we won't cover over those points and bullets that we'll have to go through this slide at this point. But again, we started off by saying if you would like to become a mentor in the program, you'll get to see these points and elaborated on during the training session. We wanted to really thank you for your time, and we also wanted to give you some hope in terms of this process. When you commit yourself to it, we really have a sense of, when we started off, this vision of that iceberg and how everybody has an iceberg and is an iceberg and has things on the top and things on the bottom. And when we are able to navigate through that to a point of where we are aligned ourselves and we have similar goals and similar visions, the same vision together, then a lot can happen. And we found this video to really put that really into perspective. Yeah, so, and that's how exciting our role as leaders can be. Let's go for the ride. So thanks for joining us. Our contact information is there, and we'd love to hang around if you have any questions. And I just want to say thank you to Alison for a really wonderful opportunity to work together. It has been an absolute blast.
It's been terrific, yeah. And thank you for joining us.
Yes,
thank you, Henry, for our collaboration together,
absolutely.
which has been awesome.
So if Henry and Alison will indulge us, maybe a couple of more minutes. If you have questions, we just put them in the chat box and we'll see if anything pops up they can respond to. I'm seeing a couple of things. Yes, we'll forward the slides to you at some point in the next couple of days. Thank you for all your thank yous to Henry and Alison for their very worthwhile presentation. A question I have before we get to any other questions. So I really appreciate how you framed the conversation and things to consider. And for both of you, are there any common pitfalls that you see people fall into when they're trying to have these powerful conversations, things that seem to pop up more than other things that they should be aware of? Like, you did a great job with a role play, and I think it really illustrated the point, but are there any specific any other specific things that that people should be aware of when they enter into these conversations?
I think I'd say that the aspect that's come up in the mentoring work to a great degree is really trying to shift from trying to solve the problem to trying to understand the problem and really collaborate on moving forward towards a result that is collectively created. So a collectively created result. I'd say that's the thing that is the greatest challenge, because our system is one where we feel so individually responsible, and how then can we kind of resist that feeling that we need to be the one to solve it, to we can be the one to help shape a culture that can collectively take responsibility. Yeah.
All right, thank you again to Alison and Henry. With that, I'm going to bring our webinar to a close. I really love the iceberg analogy because I think that this could be worthy of a whole series. I think we're just really, we've seen the tip of the iceberg with this, but we can certainly go a lot deeper. And so with that, there was one other question. How do you sign up for the program? This looks really good. So if you are a fairly new principal or vice principal, we'll put some information out in e-news as we move through the spring, but we'll go through a pretty good recruitment drive in the fall if you're interested. And we're also looking for current principals and vice principals who will serve as mentors to some of our new hires who will be our mentees in the fall. So thank you very much for your involvement. Thanks again to Alison and Henry, and I'm going to bring our webinar to a close.
Bye, folks.